Hello and welcome. Coming up tonight, who's for the chop after the Prime Minister's welfare humiliation? The Health Secretary Wes Streeting will reveal all. Can Donald Trump really bring peace to Gaza? I'll ask his former National Security Advisor, John Bolton. As Keir Starmer approaches the anniversary of his election victory, Paul and Screeney will look at where disillusioned Labour supporters are giving their support.
Yeah, I'll be looking at the rainbow of revolt here, voters scattering in all directions, making it especially hard to herd them back to Labour.
And throughout the show, we'll hear the wisdom of the former Tory Home Secretary James Cleverly and Starmer's predecessor as Labour leader, who now seems a million miles from Labour, Jeremy Corbyn. Watcher, you had to be hard-hearted not to feel sad for Rachel Reeves when she shed tears in the House of Commons at noon today. And you had to have been asleep if you didn't think those tears were connected to her and the Treasury's humiliation at the gutting of welfare reform legislation during those chaotic parliamentary scenes the previous evening. Because, as the Prime Minister made his second gigantic U-turn in the face of a full-scale revolt by his MPs, her planned savings of £5 billion dissolved to zero. She would surely have to raise taxes by some multiple of that £5 billion in the autumn, given that there is quite a hole in the public finances on the basis of her fiscal rules, and after Labour MPs revealed they can spend, but they won't cut. That's surely a reason for any Chancellor to weep salty tears, especially if, as was rumoured, the Prime Minister is concerned that the debacle has undermined the government's fiscal or financial credibility and thinks for his own survival she may need to be sacrificed, which is all very logical, but according to the most senior government source, simply wrong. She was upset, apparently for some unspecified personal reason, and the Prime Minister feels, this source tells me, that Reeves is integral to everything he wants to do, is as close to the Prime Minister as any Chancellor has been to a Prime Minister, and is going nowhere. Is this credible? Well, maybe, because apart from anything else, when rumours flew that Reeves was for the chop, the price of government debt tanked. Whatever her faults, the government's creditors think an alternative might well be worse, and Prime Minister ignores the country's creditors at his or her, yes, I'm thinking of you, Liz Truss, at his or her peril. Paul.
All right, well, Robert, I want to start tonight with a bit of a welfare check on those public finances, if you get the dreadful pun. This was the fiscal headroom, the spare amount of cash, in other words, that the Chancellor had been fiercely protecting, £9.9 billion. Now, though, we know she has had to relinquish a fair bit of that, £5.5 billion of it. The government had planned to save via those welfare reforms. This is calculated by the IFS. That is on top of the £1.25 billion spent reversing the cut to winter fuel allowance. That leaves Rachel Reeves, as you can see, with just over £3 billion to play with. Except for the fact that actually, if we're getting really detailed, well, you have to shave off a tiny bit more because now the welfare bill is actually expected to cost, not save, the government money. And already this week, emboldened rebels have been moving on to their next demand, scrapping the two-child benefit cap. The Resolution Foundation reckons that would cost £3.5 billion, more than wiping out the rest of Rachel Reeves's headroom. So little wonder there is so much talk, of course, about tax rises come the autumn. Of course, the government has tried to couch this week's welfare reforms as designed to get people into work, but the vast majority of people polled by Merlin Strategy for the Peston programme think that actually it's really about saving cash. 63% said it's about saving cash. 37% said that they buy the government's aims. What's also interesting, though, is looking at who is being put off by the government's performance. This chart from YouGov asks people who've stopped voting Labour why they've swapped to the Greens, the Lib Dems or Reform UK. Now, benefits changes are down here. Only 14% of defectors actually said that was a real issue for them, and it's fairly consistent across the parties they've defected to, where they cite that as a reason. It's nowhere near as toxic, though, for example, as immigration. So if we zoom in here, you can see that really sets off the people who've defected to reform. On the flip side, if we zoom back out again and we go to have you been too right-wing as a Labour Party, well, that sets off people who've defected to the Green Party. And what this chart really shows us is that Labour is stuck between a rock and a hard place. The rock being Nigel Farage of Reform UK, the hard place being the harder left parties or the Liberal parties. Not easy to see which way Starmer should turn. Robert.
So, Jeremy and James, we'll come on to actually the challenge that what do we think of as both main parties, Tory and Labour, face at the moment. But I just want to start. Neither of you are, politically close to Rachel Reeves, but you must have felt enormous sympathy for her when you saw her turmoil in the House of Commons today.
Well, I would feel sympathy for anyone that's obviously going through stress in some way. I've no idea what the stress is. I've no idea what the background to it is. And I think it's very unfortunate that she's sitting there on the front bench and this is there for a million people to see.
Where somebody can say to somebody as senior as that, you're not feeling great, take the day off.
The system broke down. The Labour machine is not working. And this ultimately is a people business. And when a very high-profile person, for whatever reason, and I'm not going to speculate, but for whatever reason, is on the verge of tears, whether it be the whips or her advisors or even her private office, should have said, actually, just don't be on the front bench, don't be in the glare of the cameras. And yeah, there would have been a bit of teasing that she was hiding away, but it would have been better than what we've currently seen. She has been let down by the people around her, including Starmer.
I agree with that. I mean, Parliament is a brutal place and politics can be very, very brutal and there has to be a human side to it. And I think at that point, somebody should say, well, look, actually, maybe today isn't the best day to be sitting there.
If we could get on now to the substance of what happened yesterday with Labour's revolt against the welfare reforms and then the Prime Minister's dramatic and some would say chaotic climb down. I mean, Jeremy, you think the whole reform project is straightforwardly wrong. Who do you blame for it? Do you blame Starmer? Do you blame Reeves? Do you blame the Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney?
Well, I don't know what role McSweeney had to play in it, but what I say is that the whole genesis of the bill was simply wrong. It started off by saying we are taking $5 billion out of the welfare budget, and then they decided they could take most of that from personal independence payments, and then there was understandably a huge backlash against that everywhere, and anyone in receipt of PIP was then terrified and frightened, and anyone that might be wanting to get PIP in the future was also frightened. And so they then had to backtrack to some extent. And then they said there would be a cut-off point where you could get PIP as of now, protected forevermore. But as of, say, 2026, you won't be eligible for it at all, and it simply won't happen. What then happens is mostly women give up work in order to care for somebody who is not cared for by public funding through personal independence payments. We then create a two-tier system. It was a complete mess all the way through. And yesterday was as chaotic as the worst days of the poll tax debates, of Maastricht debates. It was just completely chaotic where the minister on his feet in the chamber was deleting parts of the bill. At the end of it, I don't know about James, I wasn't absolutely clear what was left in the bill that we were voting on.
You have to, Robert, you have to understand how uncomfortable it is for me to find myself agreeing with Jeremy. But
what about me?
But he's absolutely right. He is absolutely right. I tweeted this last night before the vote. I said, I don't think there is anybody, including the minister himself, that actually knows what this bill is or isn't, or what is in it or what is out of it. And the simple fact of the matter is last week, gross hubris by the Labour front bench. Starmer saying, we are voting on this on Tuesday, and if you don't like it, there'll be a punishment beating for you, no ministerial position, no support from the party. And then yesterday afternoon, ministers frantically ringing round, begging Labour backbenchers to support the bill, asking them what it would take for them. I have been up close and personal when the leadership of a Prime Minister ebbs away. We had at least the good grace to wait over a decade before we got there. Starmer manages to do it in less than a year. It is catastrophic for his leadership.
OK, I mean, I've let you off slightly lightly there because while you have a leader who doesn't agree with the welfare reforms put forward, she hasn't actually put up anything that even looks like an alternative welfare.
There was no Tory amendment yesterday. Why was that?
We're 4.5 years away from the next general election. The economy is going to be a very different place. The principle that Kemi's put forward is absolutely right, which is we do need to change the welfare system. We do need to reduce the cost. We do need to get people back into work. And she said, if this bill achieved those things, we would vote for it, and the Labour Party couldn't even make that commitment.
Actually, to be honest, she also set some other conditions which no Prime Minister could commit to, like there won't be any tax rises, which no Prime Minister could commit to. But listen, we're going to pick this up later, James. I'm being told, sadly, we now have to go to... Actually, I thought an absolutely gripping conversation I had earlier with the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. I talked to him, of course, about all of this and about the future of the health service. I began by asking him, again, why the Chancellor had been in tears at Prime Minister's questions.
Well, I think the two things are separate. Rachel, as a team have said today, has something going on personally, not professionally. And it's easy to forget, but we are all humans as politicians. And we have lives like everyone else. But in terms of yesterday on the vote on welfare and the evolution, shall we say, of the bill, I think it's fair to say that there's been a lot of concern, not just amongst Labour MPs, but amongst disabled people, disability organisations. And we all want to get this right, because what we're trying to achieve with welfare is to make sure that the system is there for everyone when they need it, that it's there for our country for the long term. And the welfare bill is growing at such an extent that by the end of the decade, it will be roughly half what we spend on the entire National Health Service and more than we spend on national defence. So we've got to make sure it's sustainable for the long term. Now, I think
But just on that, you are on the modernising wing of the party. It looks to people like me that because you rushed it, it's now going to set you back years to actually make the system affordable. That must really upset you.
Well, two things. Firstly, I'm a product of the welfare system. When I was growing up, it put food in the fridge and money in the electric meter.
But you believe in reform?
Of course, and I also believe in the welfare state. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you used the word rushed. And I think we would accept in government that we were trying to go too fast. We didn't take people with us. I don't think it set us back years. But I do think that in terms of the Tim's review that will be looking at how we get the sequencing right, how we make sure we deliver on the reform agenda that the overwhelming majority of Labour MPs sign up to in terms of the principles, the aims, the goals. I think we've got the right sequencing now.
But do you think you can make savings during the lifetime of this Parliament?
I do. I think
it's going to be hard,
I think
given you're not going to get the Tim's review for 18 months.
Well, the review will report next year. We will then act on the basis of that review, and crucially, we want to do this with people rather than to people. And I think people will take much greater confidence in the reform agenda, which has to sustain. It does need public support. I think we'll be able to take people with us if we get the sequencing right. And I think it's not been the smoothest process. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But I think where we've ended up is in a much better place, thanks to the engagement that we've had between Labour ministers and Labour MPs.
And on the fact that it was rushed, the reason for that was because the Chancellor and the Treasury forced savings on the DWP before they had actually had a chance to review the system. This was a mistake made by the Chancellor. Does the Prime Minister still have confidence in Rachel Reeves?
Of course he does, and let's not underestimate not just the scale of the challenge that the Chancellor faced when she walked into the Treasury this time last year, but also where we are as a country today thanks to the choices she's made.
What you're saying is everybody is allowed to make a mistake in their job, even if it's a really big one?
No, I think it's more actually that when the Chancellor came in, there was a massive black hole to fill. There was a lack of business and investor confidence in the UK. She's created the stability, she's created the conditions for our economy to grow, and that is so important because when you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer, you get people coming at you all the time, myself included, saying, I've got really good ideas, I've got things I'd like you to spend money on, and it's not just cabinet ministers, you know, the Chancellor carries on her shoulders the responsibility not just of the public finances, but she cares about the family finances. She cares about the finances of every business in the country. And when you're in her position, the most important quality you need in a Chancellor is the toughness and hard-headedness to be able to say no to people. And that's what Rachel has in spades. And it's why, with the choices she's made, not always the most popular choices, the choices she's made is creating the conditions for our economy to grow.
I want to move on to the 10-year health plan in a minute. One final question in all of this. When I talk to backbench MPs, actually their anger isn't as much with Rachel Reeves as it is with Morgan McSweeney, the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, who they think was tin-eared and trying to push through something that was unacceptable. Do you think, as they do, that he needs another job?
No, I'd say two things. Firstly, it is the easiest and laziest thing in the world to blame the advisors. Advisors advise, ministers decide.
So it's the Prime Minister's
fault. We
fault.
take responsibility. The Prime Minister, me, the whole team, we take responsibility. And, you know, the Labour Party would not have been electable and would not be in government without Morgan McSweeney. And so I just say to colleagues, we're not always going to get things right in government. We are going to make mistakes, and always raise them with us. We listen, we learn, we adapt, we change, we move on, and that's what we'll do. But advisors advise, ministers decide.
So there you are, quite interesting. It's not the Chief of Staff's fault, it's the Prime Minister's fault, says Health Secretary Wes Streeting. We've got lots more in this interesting interview, but Paul, before we get on to it, you've got some data to share with us.
Yeah, it seems like a good time for another Peston's Parents' Evening. Anushka kicked this off for us last week. It's based on work done for us by Sophie Stowers at More in Common, who asked people to give various cabinet ministers an end-of-year grade. One grade for their effort and one for their attainment, their delivery, in other words, as well as a teacher's comment down the end, which could be quite entertaining. We'll take a look at two Secretaries of State tonight in detail. Seems suitable, of course, to start with Robert's interviewee, just there, the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. So he actually scraped a C down here, which was better than most people. But these, as a reminder, were some of his top targets. Reducing NHS waiting lists, they promised to do that at the election, increasing dentist appointments, and, of course, improving social care, which nobody ever bothers to get round to. On the first of these, though, reducing NHS waiting lists, there is actually some good news for the government tonight. The Health Foundation has forecast waiting lists for us, and they project that Wes Streeting will actually hit his target by the next election. So just to explain what this shows, this red line charts how long it takes before 92% of people have been seen on the NHS. So in 2024, year of the general election, of course, it was 45 weeks, by which point 92% of people had been seen on the NHS. Wes Streeting wants to get 92% of people seen within 18 weeks, hence the dotted line here. And the data suggests, as you see, that he will get there just around the time of the general election, which we assume will be around 2029. Mainly because actually, while more people are joining the waiting list, that number hasn't been growing quite as fast as it had done previously. But if any of that changes and these underlying assumptions change, well, the graph moves off target too. Robert.
Fascinating stuff. And indeed, I've talked about these sorts of issues with the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, because tomorrow the Prime Minister will launch Mr. Streeting's 10-year health plan. I therefore asked the Health Secretary, how long would it take for us, you and me, to feel and experience a rehabilitated National Health Service?
On the NHS, we came into government and we said we would deliver 2 million more appointments to help cut waiting lists in our first year. We're not yet at the one-year anniversary mark, almost there, and we've done more than double that. Waiting lists are at their lowest level in 2 years. We've taken 250,000 off the waiting list total. Now, there'll be people watching who probably now beginning to shout at the telly saying, hang on a minute, I couldn't get through on to the GP this morning, but I'm still waiting. And just to reassure people, I absolutely know that, and I'm not going to be satisfied until the NHS is delivering the right care in the right place at the right time and for people to feel the change.
But 10 years does sound to many people like jam tomorrow. Will they feel that the NHS is delivering in the way that we all hope and expect before the next election?
Yes, so on waiting lists, for example, on waiting times, we've committed to do something within this Parliament in terms of cutting waiting lists that even the last Labour government didn't deliver at the height of its success in terms of the pace and rate of change.
Pace, but they're still ridiculously high.
They are, and they won't be by the next general election. And I'm determined by the next general election, as the Prime Minister's tasked me to do, to get the waiting list and waiting time standard back to the 18 weeks that it always should have been.
One of your big plans is to put much more resource into prevention. We have an epidemic of obesity, particularly among children. A huge amount of the contributor are these appalling ultra-processed foods. You are working in partnership with the supermarkets, with the big chains like McDonald's, to try to get their agreement to try and limit the sales of this stuff. But this stuff is toxic. Aren't you just being soft, weak on what is a huge cause of ill health?
No, we're being radical and ambitious. And what we've agreed
So
with
explain why that's
what we've
radical
got with the
and ambitious.
supermarkets, for example, is a radically different approach to public health.
But you're not ordering them to put up the prices, taking more tax from them. You know, you're not ordering them to take this stuff off their shelves.
No, we're doing something that's, I think, far more radical and is going to be far more impactful. Supermarkets, in terms of the data they have on all of us as customers and what we're buying, they have some of the best public health data in the world. And what we're agreeing to with them is that they will publish that information. We will set a target to make the average shop more healthy. And then supermarkets, with all of their insight into all of our behaviour as customers and with their purchasing power from terms of where they get their supplies from, the produce they put on their shelves, they will decide in terms of how they market, how they price their products, where they place their products, and all of the things that they do that drive our consumer behaviour. They will make our shopping healthier.
Will it all be voluntary or will there be coercion here?
And well, the targets and the approach will be mandatory, but instead we're going to do it together with supermarkets, and that's how we're going to make. That's how we're going to make the healthier. Well,
there will
the
be
healthier choice, the easy choice.
There will be one or two
work.
who will exploit what you're doing. It'll be interesting to see whether you do manage to get them all on
Yeah,
board.
the data doesn't lie. We'll keep a beady eye out.
I've got one final question for you on another big issue. Back in March, the National Audit Office came up with a forecast that said that by 2036, the NHS's employees will rise to 2.3 million. That's 70% increase. 120 billion in wages would be being forked out, excluding GPs. Are they right that even in a digital artificial intelligence world, we're going to have to see 2.3 million people working in the NHS?
Well, worse still, Robert, on the previous government's workforce plan, over the course of the century, if we carried on their trajectories, we would see 100% of the population working for the National Health Service.
Which is sort of my point.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm just asking you.
It's absurd.
Where are we heading?
Yeah, it's absurd.
In terms of the size of the workforce,
Yeah.
and what can be automated, what AI can do.
As you'll see in the 10-year plan tomorrow, there is a big emphasis on the revolution that's taking place in life sciences and medical technology and in automation that is going to enable us not just to liberate NHS staff from a load of dull, routine admin tasks that they do, but to free up time that will enable us to see more patients. For example, if we just saved 90 seconds in every interaction the patient has with their GP, we would create the equivalent of 2,000 GPs worth of time.
Exactly.
This is the game changer. This is how we make sure that healthcare in our country is not just more responsive to the patient, there's more ease, more convenience for the patient, more choice and control for the patient. This is how we make the NHS financially sustainable for the long term, because this is the jeopardy and the pressure I feel, it's not just to recover the NHS from the crisis it's in today, it's to make sure the NHS is sustainable for the long term, not just back on its feet, but fit for the future.
As always, Wes Streeting, very good to see you.
Good to talk to you.
James, if I could just come to you first. Prevention is cheaper and in many ways better than cure. You must think that what they're doing in terms of putting more emphasis, particularly on eating more healthily, trying to do deals with the big supermarkets to... I still didn't... From talking to him, I couldn't work out whether this was, coercion or nudging. I think we'll have to see the detail tomorrow. But as an aim, you must think that's the right thing to do.
Well, he's being very Tory in his approach. That seems to be nudge theory, which David Cameron was a big fan of. It's working with the commercial insights of the big retailers, so leaning on the expertise of the commercial world. He's clearly taken lessons from the Conservatives, and therefore I'm broadly positive, devil's in the detail. But ultimately, he is right that we need to see prevention, early diagnosis, early treatment, because that is the only way that we are going to make the National Health Service's books balance financially, and it's better for the patients. But I'll give you one example. Before we left government, we allocated £15.5 million for an AI-supported radiotherapy product, which sped up and freed up time of radiologists, cut under this government. So talk is cheap, but a project that was actually up and running, tried and tested technology, has lost its funding under Labour.
They are
so the
investing
gulf
a ton of money in new scanners, so it's possible that they've just, in a sense, replicating in a different way.
Well, look, the devil's in the detail. If he's as good as his word, then I think there are things that he is proposing that we could support. But, as I say, talk is cheap. Let's see what he comes up with.
And Jeremy, when you heard James saying that Wes has taken lessons from the Tory party in terms of whether we call it nudge theory or working with the private sector to get obesity down, what's your view on that?
Well, I think you should be looking at the reasons that there's a rise in obesity, the reasons why there's such a high level of mental health stress within our society, and the levels of poverty and bad housing that exist, particularly in inner city areas. All of that combines together. Children being obese isn't because the child wants to be obese or the parents want to be obese. It is because of the cost of food and the quality of the food that they buy, because poor quality food is cheaper. And so you see parents buying food that frankly is not very good, but that's the only choice that they've got. And so I do think we need to look at the levels of poverty within our society and the effect that has. Also, there are issues of public health and prevention issues. Public health in terms of air quality, in terms of water quality, a whole lot of things that we need to be looking at as well in this. Mental health crisis isn't mentioned. Now, presumably, something will come out about that tomorrow, but I know
very much so. I mean, they are definitely recruiting
well,
very large numbers.
I hope they are, but the issue is that if somebody realises they have a mental health problem, realises they need help, that's a light bulb moment. But if they're told to wait 6 months or a year for talking therapy, the opportunity's gone.
And one of the reasons many people think that we've had this surge in people claiming PIP is because they're not getting the help, particularly with mental health issues. And so this stuff is connected. Now, sadly, we've got to bring this bit of the conversation to an end, but there's tons more I'm going to talk to both of you about, Jeremy and James. Don't go away. Much more after the break, including a conversation with the former Donald Trump National Security Advisor, Mr. Bolton. See you in a second.
Welcome to the Twitter break. So it has been a year of weird and wonderful headlines around the world so far. We thought we'd test our guests by seeing whether you can work out which headlines are real and which are fake. Because we do live in a world where fact and fiction are kind of hard to distinguish between sometimes. So, who wants to try this one? Florida debates lifting some child labour laws to fill jobs vacated by undocumented immigrants. Do we think that's a real headline or a fake headline?
I hope it's a fake headline.
I think it's true.
It's a real headline. That is the world we live in. Tiffany Trump set to launch makeup and fake tan line to make America beautiful again.
Oh, got to be true.
It's not true, that one. It's one of the more frivolous ones, sadly, that isn't true. Elon Musk's own AI chatbot has turned on him and says he's spreading misinformation.
That was true.
Yeah.
True.
That was true. US gripped by Liz Truss mania. Former PM gains cult following stateside.
I think that might be true.
I think it would be specific and limited, but there is a following.
It's only true in her dreams, I'm afraid. It's not. It's not real. Right. Department of Homeland Security exploring reality TV show where migrants compete for citizenship.
Oh, yeah, that's got to be true.
No, please, that can't be true.
That is a real headline.
Yeah.
RFK Jr. I don't think people should be taking medical advice from
He
me.
never said that. He never said that, did he?
No, that's true.
It's true.
He said that.
True. That's it. That's
said
it.
that.
He's definitely
He said that. He said that. US defends tariffs on remote island of penguins and seals.
Oh, no, that is true.
That's
That is
true.
true.
That is absolutely true. But nobody
Yeah.
told them where the island was, but it's okay. Don't worry
Yeah,
about that.
no one lives there, but if the penguins have got anything to trade, then they'll be taxed.
Oh, and that one is true as well.
Yeah, Trump at Alcatraz, alligators will police migrants. That is
True.
You know, we could save a lot of money on border security.
we
with a
are.
load of alligators. There we go. Well, you guys did pretty well.
Yeah, did very well.
Um,
did very well.
Great. See you in a few minutes.
Welcome back. As I said before the break a little earlier, I spoke with Donald Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton, and I began by asking him to assess the prospect that there'd be a ceasefire in Gaza that might coincide with a visit to Washington next week of the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, it's possible, but the position of Hamas has been throughout all these possible discussions that it wants a complete end to the war in Gaza in exchange for the release of all Israeli hostages. And that's just not something the Israeli government is going to accept. They want the destruction of Hamas. You can have temporary ceasefires here and there, get a few hostages released or remains returned, but I don't see this as the beginning of a permanent peace in Gaza.
What's the most constructive thing that the president can do in these circumstances?
Well, I think that he is sympathetic to the view of the Netanyahu government that they want to see the end of Hamas as a political and military force. I think he also wants to get the Nobel Peace Prize. He's not going to get it for Ukraine, where there's not going to be peace in the near term. He probably won't get it in Iran. Maybe he thinks he can get it in Gaza. But I do think this meeting on Monday between Netanyahu and Trump is going to be extremely important. It's Netanyahu's third visit to the White House since Trump was inaugurated. That's two more than any other foreign leader, and there's obviously a lot at stake for both of them.
Do you think President Trump will endeavour to somehow persuade Prime Minister Netanyahu to stop the killing of civilians who are queuing up for food?
Well, I think he would put it in the way he puts most things, which is, this doesn't look good for you, Bibi, and it doesn't look good for me either. And of course, what he really means is, it doesn't look good for me. So I think there will be a discussion of that. And the discussions I've seen them have during the first term, they're very frank with each other. And they're politicians who know their interest and pursue them vigorously. That's why I think the stakes are high on Monday.
Who do you think the senior partner really is? Because there have been signs in recent months that it's actually Netanyahu calling the shots.
Well, I think the relationship between the two of them is not as friendly as some believe on the outside, in part because Trump recognizes that in Netanyahu, he has a politician even more skilled than he is at being able to put himself in a good light. And who gets credit, for example, for destroying or at least setting back substantially Iran's nuclear weapons program? I think Netanyahu really forced Trump to make a very hard choice, either join in the attack on the nuclear program or not. And in that sense, I think Netanyahu outmaneuvered Trump. So it is a legitimate question, who is the senior partner?
There are indications that Netanyahu wants to start the bombing of Iran again. What do you think Trump's position on that should be?
Well, I think the only long-term solution to the nuclear threat, the proliferation threat posed by Iran, is deposing the Ayatollahs. I think the regime is actually very weak. I think the Iranian people are enormously discontented. I think the potential is there. But in the meantime, while that plays out inside Iran, Netanyahu, I'm sure, will point out to Trump that the Iranian program was not totally and completely obliterated, and as Trump has said, and that what Israel and the U.S. should do is make sure that the Iranians cannot fix it, cannot reopen the Fordo facility, for example. And I think that would require continued action. Right now, we've got total freedom of the skies over Iran. We certainly want to make sure they don't rebuild their air defenses. I think that will require more military force, either by us or by the Israelis.
On a separate field of conflict, how anxious are you that America is scaling back shipments of arms to Ukraine?
I think this is a huge mistake. I don't think, notwithstanding that the White House issued an announcement about it, I'm not sure yet this is a decision that Trump made. The argument is that in terms of missile defenses and artillery ammunition, that if we make these shipments, we will be below the level of resources we need for our own defense. I personally find that hard to believe. I haven't seen any calculations that would demonstrate it. I think this is precisely the wrong moment to show weakness as we see Russian troops building up along the Ukraine border in northeastern Ukraine to open potentially a new front. And I think our Congress today and this past couple of weeks has been enmeshed in domestic legislation. But I think when they get free from that, which they may do in the next day or so before the 4th of July, this decision will raise a lot of opposition. And I think it's important. I think it can be rolled back. I really don't think Trump understood what this would mean.
Finally, on a different kind of conflict, the world has been agog at the battle between Elon Musk and President Trump. President Trump is not somebody who forgives or forgets a slight. How damaged will the world's richest man be at the end of all this?
Well, he's certainly taken a lot of hits, but this is something I think has obviously become personal to him. And he's got so much money that spending even very large amounts for any other normal human being, I don't think is going to deter him. I think this is emblematic of the difficulty that any would-be successor to Trump will have holding the MAGA base together, because it's an unnatural coalition to begin with. It reflects only Donald Trump and nobody else. But that's what keeps our politics interesting.
It certainly keeps it interesting. Not always stable, perhaps. But John Bolton, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So, Jeremy James, there's been a a slightly disturbing amount of agreement between the two of you up to now. I suspect we're not going to see that on the issues I'm about to raise. Jeremy, I want to come to you first. You've got a bill going through Parliament on Friday, which is about the UK's arms sales to Israel. What is it you're trying to do with this bill?
To have a proper inquiry into the sale of weapons to Israel, into the development of the policy, and the reaction that the British government should and could have taken to the ICJ opinion on genocide, and the breach of the Fourth Geneva Convention by Israel as an occupying power, because I want us to know exactly what calculations are made by the British government. I've been raising questions about the parts with the F-35 jets over the past year, and eventually it's very clear that the parts were being supplied, are being supplied, and put into the global supply chain. Now,
is your motive that broadly you want the government to somehow be brought into this case against Israel as war criminal?
Well, it's whether
you want the British government to be accused of being a war criminal.
If you supply weapons to somebody that is accused of acts of genocide, as the Israeli government is, then you yourself become complicit in those acts as well. I think this debate ought to focus on what is happening to the people in Gaza. I mean, John Bolton is talking in terms of sort of political calculations here and there. The reality is, hundreds are dying every day in Gaza, shot because they're trying to get food. 60,000 are already dead. Surely to goodness, the efforts of all the governments ought to be in a ceasefire and getting aid in there, instead of this sort of idea there's a sort of calculation about who's the bigger daddy. Is it Netanyahu or is it Trump? Let's look at the humanity of the situation.
Well, obviously, we're all horrified by the deaths of civilians, everywhere, particularly in Gaza at the moment. But James, what do you think of Jeremy's initiative?
Well, look, Jeremy's a pacifist. I disagree with him on this. I respect, actually, the consistency of his position, but I think he's wrong. The fact is that Israel is responding to a brutal terrorist attack where there was widespread rape, murder and hostage taking.
But it doesn't require the killing of civilians who are queuing up to get food.
And I have, certainly when I was Foreign Secretary and whilst I was Government Minister, I spoke regularly with the Israelis to say it is absolutely appropriate you defend yourself, but be very conscious of the second-order impact of what you do, be very conscious of regional instability, be very conscious of your ability as a nation-state to forge a future which is sustainable and peaceful. I have had, and I've continued to have those conversations.
But Netanyahu ignores you, he ignores your successor, David Lammy. What more... I mean, lots of people watching will be saying we should be doing more. So what more can we do?
Well, look, the idea that if we withdrew our military cooperation with Israel, that somehow their military action in Gaza would stop is a nonsense. Our relationship with Israel, they are a close international partner, does not mean we always agree. And I have had very direct conversations with my interlocutors in Israel. But the idea that we disengage from Israel, who have been working closely to protect British people in the region from terrorism, I just think is a completely unsustainable situation.
James, you must have had dealings with them on lots of things. The reality is they are not just doing what they're doing in Gaza, it's also the intense occupation of the West Bank, it is the settler violence, it is the imprisonment of people, and it is the detestation that the Palestinian people have for the occupation. Now, the British government's consistent position, both Labour and Conservative, was that we were opposed to the occupation of the West Bank and absolutely opposed to the settlement policy. Both things have got worse.
Well, I've pulled up the Israelis on settlement expansion on the West Bank. I've said it is in contravention of international law.
Absolutely.
I've said it is against their best interests. I will continue to do so. But the idea that because we have, in some instances, very deep disagreements with Israel, that we disengage from them is neither practical nor in the interests of British people.
To be honest, there was actually, even on that, more agreement between the two of you than I actually expected. It's been an interesting evening. Now, don't go away, because we've got much more from James and Jeremy after the break.
Welcome to the second Twitter break. And in this discussion, we want to focus on banknotes because the Bank of England announced that it is going to review what is on our banknotes for the first time in decades, potentially removing historical figures and replacing it with maybe landmarks or other symbols of Britishness. So we thought we would ask you guys what you would like to see on a banknote. Any particular? It can still be a person if you want. It can be a place. It can be a symbol. It could be Robert Peston. He's not even listening. But any ideas of what?
There's always big arguments when there are people on there. I actually wouldn't lose tons of sleep if we removed people and put iconic, White Cliffs of Dover, Headingham Castle, beautiful Norman castle in the heart of my constituency.
I thought you might choose a constituency.
Finching Field, beautiful village in the heart of my constituency.
Stevenson's Rocket.
So actually,
That's not from Essex.
if it's not from Essex,
Stevenson's Rocket is definitely not from Essex.
But look, I mean, genuinely, I think there are things which could be really iconic representations of the country rather than people. Because most people, you look at some wrinkly-faced, person, and you're like, what? How is that meaningful?
So, Jeremy, what symbol of North Islington are you going to put?
Oh, we
Town
could
Hall,
put the
maybe.
Archway Bridge, or we could put the Arsenal Stadium, or we could put Finsbury Park in all its glory and all its beauty. But I actually quite like the idea of having lots of birds and lots of animals and flowers and plants and mountains and so on, because that also gives people an understanding of the beauty of our countryside and the beauty of the natural world, and that helps people to begin to understand a bit more about the environment. This will be an educational exercise without people realising they're being educated.
A favourite bird?
Oh, favourite bird. There's
One
so
that El
there's-
Gato hasn't killed.
Well, sadly, El Gato has passed on, is no longer with us.
I know.
So El Gato is no longer with us. But birds, there are not that many in my garden, but the ones I enjoy are the blue tit and the robin.
OK. All right, there you go. The robin would be my
I mean,
my pick, I think.
banknotes, they've got to be very close to their sell-by date. I genuinely cannot remember.
How many have you got on you now?
None.
Same here. Have you got any on you?
I don't think I've carried physical cash
Yeah, same.
for 5 years.
Coins, especially. Coins even more than notes. Right, we've got to wrap it up there. We'll see you in a few minutes' time.
Welcome back. Now, Paul, you've got some headlines and some more information to share with us.
Yeah, Robert, before we move on to our next screening, I just want to quickly touch on the front pages because, as you would expect, Rachel Reeves features on every single front page that's dropped so far. Those tears, symbolic, really, a very symbolic image, I think, of a very difficult week for the government, no doubt, much to her personal discomfort. But we want to talk about a different cabinet minister now because we're going to return to Peston's parents' evening and look now at the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. Now, this is typically one of the toughest gigs in government. I was talking to a former cabinet minister today, not James Cleverly, who made the case again that this department really should be broken up due to being so unwieldy. For example, the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, down here, of course, being called F&F, has as her targets reducing net migration and also halving serious crime. Two very different portfolios, quite frankly. Now, on net migration, that has actually been falling. The Tories say, thanks to their changes that they made in government. Small boats, though, of course, fall outside of this net migration figure, and that tells a very different story. This chart shows the running total of small boat crossings in every year that this has been a phenomenon. Actually, it's a reminder that it's only really been a phenomenon since Brexit. Down here, 2018 barely even registers on the chart. But this year, 2025, outstrips all the other years, way ahead, breaking records all the time, month after month. 20,000 crossings so far this year. That's about 50% higher than 2024. And we're only just into the summer months when calmer conditions usually lead to soaring crossings. Robert.
Thanks so much, Paul. James, I mean, historically, the Home Office has been the graveyard for, politicians. I think when you told me, I think you got out with your reputation just about intact. But when you were there, did you think it was unwieldy, that it was the wrong mix of, activities, responsibilities?
The Home Office is a really weird combination over functions where you have very direct control and functions where you have surprisingly little control. So policing is much more delegated than people recognise.
I mean, it's always struck me that's a nightmare for the Home Secretary, because you get blamed when things go wrong, but the independence of the police is really very significant.
Yeah, and the number of times that I would have people write to me or confront me on social media or face-to-face and say, why aren't you making the Metropolitan Police do this? And I would say, because I don't run the Metropolitan Police. That's the Mayor of London, but it's not well understood. Those small boat arrivals figures are catastrophic. And I am particularly angry about that because I was criticised by Yvette Cooper, and I think she thought it would be easy, and it's proven to be really hard. And where she has got some success, which is legal migration figures, I claim full credit for that, because I put the visa regime in place that brought those numbers down. Actions that were opposed by the Labour Party at the time, and so the only bit of her portfolio which is doing well is the bit that she inherited from me.
Actually, I've got to come to Jeremy. There's one thing I do need to pick you up on. If we've got time, I'll come back to you later. Jeremy, one of the things that there's been a lot of talk about is whether you will turn your alliance of MPs into a formal party and whether you're thinking of contesting the next election as a formal party. Where are you on that?
The alliance group of MPs, 5 of us, have worked very hard and very well together over the past year in Parliament, and we're coming up to our first anniversary.
But there's some data that shows that if you did launch a party, you might do rather well.
Well, exactly. So next time you ask questions, ask about the alternative of a left independent party, of a socialist view that's being put.
So are you going to create one?
Let me finish. You're so excited. You just want it to start, don't you?
We haven't got long. The reason I'm pushing is we haven't got long to the end of the
program. That's what it is. There's a lot of people all around the country in different independent groups. You look in Birmingham, look in Liverpool, look in Southport and so on. There is a thirst for an alternative view to be put. I'm working with all of those people. That grouping will come together. There will be an alternative view and there will be an alternative put there, which is about a society that deals with poverty, inequality, and a foreign policy that's based on peace rather than war.
And would you like to lead that group?
I'm here to work. I'm here to serve the people in the way I've always tried to do.
I think if I were Keir Starmer, I'd be slightly anxious about what we've just heard from you. Very interesting. Now, that is it, not just for this week, but for this run of shows. We'll be back in September when, for our sanity and prosperity, I hope everything feels a bit more stable, but I doubt it will be. Sorry. See you then.